Now let's get into the rest of the week's top stories with our U.S. Report regular, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, welcome back to the program. And those Biden family investigations, they're still kicking along despite all of the conflict in the Middle East and everything else we're seeing. This week, the House Oversight Committee released new evidence as their investigation ramps up further. A couple of weeks ago, there was an explicit money trail they released around a $250,000 check. And now Chairman James Morrow alleges that Joe Biden received another $40,000 in, quote, laundered China money from the bank account of his brother in 2017. Now, Mick, it's a really complicated scheme that Comer's team claims to have uncovered, but it does seem there was an awful lot of money flying around between Biden family members here.
Yeah, James, and hello from San Francisco, where I've actually finished speaking at University of California, Berkeley. So I have been in the belly of the beast here in the last couple of days.
Oh, wow.
But let's talk about those checks. There's two interesting things. Number one, they both seem to say they are for loan repayments, but there doesn't seem to be any evidence yet of a loan to repay. The second thing that's interesting is the date. Keep in mind, this is all happening in 2017. Joe Biden and his family were absolutely convinced that he was done with public service once Donald Trump was elected. He was going to sail off into the sunset and make a bunch of money doing, I guess, what retired vice presidents do. So he never expected the scrutiny of coming back into office. That's where I think there may have been mistakes made by the family. They didn't cover their tracks, and now there's turning out to be hard evidence of money going to Joe Biden and other members of his family. Where that money comes from remains to be seen. That investigation is ongoing. But certainly this doesn't look good for the vice president to have not one, but two checks to him floating around in tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, so Mick, this really kind of brings up a couple of interesting points here. Number one, the way that a former vice president could kind of monetize his Rolodex to just, collect money from various people and organizations and companies around the globe. But number two, now that he hasn't, as you say, covered his tracks, if this continues to burble along, is it actually going to stick? Will there be consequences for Joe Biden insofar as, people not voting for him or something more substantial?
A bunch of possibilities there, James. Look, the one thing that Joe Biden has been selling since the day he decided to run against Donald Trump back in 2020 was that if you elected him, things would get back to normal, that the craziness would end, that the so-called Trump corruption would end, and that you get back to something that looks like a real presidency. If Joe Biden has been taking money from folks he's not supposed to be taking money from, keep in mind, it's not illegal to get paid for doing real work. One of the allegations here is this money is actually coming from China, which would absolutely be a problem. It could get him in trouble being a foreign agent. So there's all sorts of permutations here that are possible. But the bigger thing politically is he's now lost that patina of sort of normalcy. Not only is he having difficulty with his age, as you focused on every single week, he's having difficulty communicating every single week, which you've talked about. But now it seems like he's getting dragged down into this. Maybe the family isn't as clean as he wants us to think. Maybe things aren't as normal. Maybe it's just as crazy with him as office as it was with the Trump family. So he's having difficulty now, I think, maintaining that same sort of sheen of normalcy that he used to win the presidency in 2020.
Yeah, and I'm going to get to the Trump legal issues in a moment, but House Speaker Mike Johnson, the new speaker, he's talking about subpoenaing Hunter Biden. Do you think that this is at all realistic? I mean, this would just be an incredible show, wouldn't it? Hunter Biden on Capitol Hill?
Sure. I mean, well, think about it. Let's look at it through the lens of fairness. If these folks' last name was Trump instead of Biden, and the Democrats were in charge of the House, and they were doing an impeachment inquiry, and they had checks from family members to Donald Trump for loans being repaid that no one seems to have any record of an underlying loan. Yeah, you'd see Don Jr. being hauled into Congress. You'd see Eric hauled into Congress. You'd see Ivanka Trump hauled into Congress. Absolutely, you would. It's not like you're sort of making up the connection. There's hard evidence of money flowing between Joe and Hunter Biden. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they subpoena him.
Yeah, well, look, and then at the same time, as you say, there's this whole perception of fairness because in New York, they're going after the Trump organization, essentially trying to shut down the whole business, claiming that they misrepresented the assets and so on. Both Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump have testified this week. They said, well, we left the valuations and such up to the accountants. We didn't really have anything to do with it. Mm-hmm. How is this playing out? Are people just looking at this and going, come on, guys, this is just another attempt to get the Trumps, or is this having any sort of influence outside New York?
No, the case in Georgia is still getting a lot of attention. The case in Washington, D.C. related to January 6th is getting some attention. This is getting very little attention because keep in mind, James, again, this is not a criminal proceeding in New York. This is the Attorney General in New York accusing Donald Trump of lying about what he was worth. Okay, that apparently is against the law. It is against the law in New York State. But Donald Trump has got some really strong defenses, most specifically that he paid back every single loan that is relevant to this case. So the Attorney General is saying that he lied, and as a result, other people were injured. And Trump is throwing his hands up and saying, I paid back every single loan that I took. Everybody got repaid. In fact, some people got paid back early. Where is the harm here? And that's a really effective defense in this particular case. So it does get some attention because, yes, the kids are being called to testify. Eric has testified. Don Jr. has testified. Ivanka is fighting having to testify. We'll find more about that the next 24 hours or not. So it's getting some attention for its celebrity appeal, but no one's actually looking at this the same way they're looking at the criminal actions in the other jurisdictions.
And let's get on to the ground here, Mick, about what's actually happening with the presidential campaign coming up here. Joe Biden is visiting Minnesota to promote his sort of rural plans and plans to support farmers in the fight against climate change, I guess. But privately, I'm told allies are hoping that the White House outreach, which is part of a much bigger blitz on rural America, can also help claw back voters in parts of the country where the Democrats are hemorrhaging support. Is this working, and how much trouble is he in some of these Midwestern states?
It's too early to say whether or not this is working. He's just starting, but he's got a steep hill to climb. His approval ratings have actually gone down since the beginning of the Israeli war, and that despite the fact that he's been very aggressive on TV. He's been very strong supporter of Israel. You could talk about whether or not his policies contributed to the situation, but since the war broke out, he's been a very strong supporter of Israel, and that's costing him votes. He's down about 10 points amongst Democrat voters since the beginning of the war. So he's moving in the wrong direction. Yes, they're sending him out into rural America to see how he's doing, but a lot of the arrows are pointing against him. Keep in mind, we've not even talked about the fact that a Democrat member of Congress filed to run against him this week, and now there's discussion about a dam breaking, and maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 other Democrats are now seriously considering filing against him now that this one Democrat has filed. So, yeah, Joe Biden's got a lot of difficulty even within his party before he needs to worry about rural voters in Minnesota against Donald Trump.
Mick Mulvaney, we're going to have to leave it there, but that sounds like a pretty good sneak preview of what we'll be talking about next week. Thank you so much for your time.